So Ventro are a third-party accredited fire safety contractor and provide the survey, installation and maintenance of both active and passive fire safety systems. Our end-to-end approach means you only deal with one provider, and this makes it simple to achieve true fire safety. Also, we always work in line with the golden thread of information as laid out in the Hackett report.
So the golden thread essentially has its genesis in the Hackett report and the review of building safety standards following the Grenfell Tower fire. This report was published in May 2018, and one of its core findings was what it called the ineffective operation of current rules around the creation, storage, and handover of building and fire safety information. In its overview of the evidence, it said that even in cases where information was present, it was often incomplete. It was sometimes held in paper copy only in dusty old files, in the sort of back end of rooms. And it was rarely made accessible to people who actually needed it, whether that was residents, fire safety personnel, or anybody else who might have an interest in it. And this led to several issues. And one of the main ones was that building owners just simply didn't have a good grasp about how safe their buildings were. It didn't enable them to know about any design changes from the original plans or the impact of any refurbishments. And it consequently meant that they couldn't effectively manage the safety and fire risks of a building across its full life cycle. And to remedy this, the review proposed what it termed the golden thread, this creation of a digital record to ensure that accurate building information is securely created, updated regularly, it's accessible to people who need it, and that all of that can be done at different points of the building life cycle. Consultation was an important step because it set out not only that the golden thread should be accessible and transferable, it also grappled with a really practical question, which is, should there be a standardized digital tool and system that would need to be used across all eligible and relevant buildings? Now, in its response to the consultation, the government noted the concerns about not mandating standards for structuring information or mandating standards around data coding, and they decided that imposing a solution for the whole of the industry essentially wouldn't be efficient. They said it would be important for individual accountable persons to be able to work through different digital solutions, different classification systems, different coding systems that would work for their organizations and their buildings. But they also recognized the need for guidance and the need for solutions that could be developed at a sector level that providers could adopt, rather really than leaving everybody to go it alone and sort of work out their own solutions in silos. But the aim of the Special Interest Group 3 is to develop a digital framework for the golden thread that would meet the requirements of the legislation, and that will work with the government's broader proposals and sort of now finalised proposals for the in-occupation regime. So using the same language as before, maybe, the purpose of this group and what we're trying to do is to design the architecture of an archive that can be used by people across the sector to process and store golden thread information in a way that's compliant with the legislation and with the regulations.
Providers must take all reasonable steps to ensure the health and safety of tenants in their homes and associated communal areas. It's complicated because, especially where we've got leasehold. So, it's about how we coordinate with each other to make sure that the building can remain safe. Timely and effective repairs. I think they've missed the word competent out here somewhere, because we need to also make sure that those repairs are being done by competent people. And thirdly, there's a piece in here around assisting tenants seeking housing adaptations. And then there's a bit more detail, legal requirements relating to health and safety. Interestingly, there's one now around legally required completing actions as a result of those legally required health and safety assessments are carried out within appropriate timescales. Now, at the moment, they don't prescribe those timescales. Obviously, lots of providers do, when it comes to repairs, for example. But, just to point back to AWAB's law in terms of our government going to go down that road, it's just something we need to think about to make sure that repairs are being completed in a timely fashion. And I think the other point I wanted to pick up on was about using data across your organisation. We see some really good practice in organisations where work is going on across the whole organisation. We need to make sure that continues to happen to to ensure that all relevant information and data is used in the best way to keep residents safe.
So, I mean, when we analyse those deaths within those Regulation 28 reports, smoking's the biggie. Smoking's the biggie, and being able to so smoking, 58%, 18% people unable to move away from the fire, and the emollient cream, 12. And in those statistics relate to fires up until about October last year. And I'll mention quickly, and you'll be seeing links to them later, but I came across 2 fires that occurred more recently. One was an elderly lady who died in a sheltered block in a housing association property as a result of their extractor fan in the bathroom catching fire. Electrical fault, should it have happened. And then the other one is a guy who was living in his living room on a bed with a crass mattress next to him in case he fell out of bed, carers 4 times a day, a smoker. And the carers had been advised that standard fire brigade advice, close your doors at night. So they closed the doors when they left him after the 4th visit that day. And he was smoking. He fell asleep, the fag dropped, and nobody had thought to think about that the smoke alarm in the property was actually in the hallway. So by the time the smoke filtered through the door and set the alarm off, the elderly gentleman was dead.
Legislation for suppression in car parks, there isn't any. Approved Document B, Fire Safety Scotland Act, have no mandatory requirement for suppression in car parks. They do talk about sprinklers and suppression as useful. Jeff will talk about some of the research that they've commissioned in the past around it, but there isn't, as it stands at the moment, any mandatory requirement to have suppression in car parks. And we'll also look at how vehicles are changing from standard ICE engines to electric vehicles and the fire challenges around that. And talking about electric vehicles, but the Building Safety Act does say on new builds, you've got to put in EV charging points in your car parks, even if they're underground. So that's adding to the risk. We've looked around trying to find, has any other country got any less legislation here? Again, not directly. Spain and Germany have some regulations that require sprinklers with automatic car parks with more than 20 cars in them. But your general car parks under building, there isn't any legislation that we could find in Europe, in the UK, even the US. I'm not sure about Japan because they've got some other bits around this. So there isn't any legislation that says it. We've noticed the trend with electric vehicles and the issues around them. And certainly some of the German states and some towns have banned electric vehicles and covered car parks there. But the situation is that the last update of ADB was 2019, didn't look at it or add anything. They did a minor update in 2020, and of course in 2022 they did the update to cover cladding. But as it stands at the moment, they're not looking, or at the moment not looking at whether or not sprinklers should be, or suppression of some form should be installed in covered car parks.
What you've got here, we've just pulled up 3 different research papers, as Robert previously mentioned. The first one we've got was the BRE report, which investigated obviously the car park fires, particularly trying to find out what the fire load was and how that affected the actual outcomes from that. They also looked at sprinklers as to see if they were effective. And obviously there was also a question about smoke extraction in there as well. All of the things that they discovered during that was actually put into approved document B, which was to do with fire safety. So they kind of looked at the warning and escape, obviously internal and external fire spread, which is predominantly coming worse as people tend to pack more cars in, so the space between them becomes less. And then obviously the effects and what the fire and rescue service will and can do during that plate. So pros from a sprinkler's perspective, obviously they're defined within the standards, albeit they may change. We've got history, so there's evidence of them actually working, and they are definitely less affected by ventilation. So if you've got wind or movement of air through, obviously the size of the droplets and the water being spread is going to be less affected by that. Okay, what's the cons? Obviously, we've got a higher retrofit impact purely because we've got large pipe, we've got to find somewhere for pumps, etc., and all of the tanks as well. If there is a fire, there is a significant discharge of water, and this is becoming more obvious now as to what we can do with this water. How do we stop it going and entering into the drainage systems, etc., and compromising those? So it's kind of what we need to think about how we do that. The pros from a water mist perspective, we've got lower retrofit impact. What do we mean by that? Again, we've got smaller pipework and nozzles. We've got pumps and smaller tanks because we don't need as much water from that. So you've got a lower water quantity being discharged. Cons, we've got no published UK standards. We have got the European one. We mentioned the VDS. And obviously, because water mist works by production of smaller droplets, it is much more affected by the ventilation. So if you went and put it in an open car park above ground and you had that flowing, there's a potential that all of that water mist could be carried away. So, but in a basement area where there's little or no ventilation, then water mist could be an advantage for that. Okay. And obviously we've got lots of different things going on from a suppression point of view, because we've got obviously not just, we talked about car parks, but we've obviously got scooters and cycles in car parks as well. And Robert's already mentioned the thing about EVs. So there are some more challenges that we will have to look at before we get those standards to reflect all of the current risks. And we certainly have, as we've all seen, that bigger economic damage when we do have a fire.